Picture this. It's the night before Thanksgiving, 1971. A Boeing 727 is getting tossed around in a freezing rainstorm, flying low over the dark, dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. In the cockpit, the pilots feel a sudden jolt, a weird little change in air pressure. They don't know it yet, but that small bump means their 5-hour nightmare is finally over. Because at that exact moment, a man with a briefcase bomb and $200,000 strapped to his body just stepped off the back of their plane and disappeared into the night.
For more than 50 years, the story of D.B. Cooper has been this incredible, magnetic mystery. I mean, it's a story of pure audacity, a seemingly perfect crime that's launched 1,000 theories, created an entire army of citizen detectives, and it remains, to this day, America's only unsolved skyjacking. So yeah, let's dive into this absolute masterclass of a mystery and see if we can piece together what on earth really happened.
All right, so to really get why this case is so completely baffling, we've got to go right back to the beginning. We need to break down the crime itself, because every single detail, from how he bought the ticket to the moment he jumped, seems so meticulously planned. And yet, it's also full of these weird contradictions that have left investigators scratching their heads for decades.
What's just wild about this timeline is how smooth it all was. It's 2 o'clock, the day before Thanksgiving. A quiet guy in a business suit walks up, pays $20 cash for a ticket. That's it. No ID, no security. You have to remember, this was a totally different world of air travel. Then, a few minutes after takeoff, the whole thing begins, not with a big scene, but with a quiet little note. For the next couple of hours, as they're circling Seattle, most of the passengers have no idea what's going on. They just think there's a small mechanical issue. Meanwhile, on the ground, it's total chaos. The FBI, the airline, they're all scrambling. At 5:45, the exchange goes down, smooth as silk. The passengers get off, Cooper gets his money in parachutes, and he's alone with the crew. He then gives them a very specific flight plan, and by 7:40, they're airborne again. And then, less than 35 minutes later, he's gone. Just vanished.
You know, Cooper's demands tell us a lot. He asked for negotiable American currency, which is kind of formal, right? Some investigators thought that might mean he wasn't American. But the parachute request, that was genius. He demanded 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes and 2 reserves. Why 4? Well, it made the authorities think he might take a hostage with him. That meant they couldn't risk giving a parachute that was rigged to fail. And that last line, no funny stuff or I'll do the job, delivered with total calm. It let everyone know he was not messing around. He was polite, almost shockingly so, but he was 100% in control. And let's just talk about the cash for a second. $200,000 in 1971. That was a massive amount of money. To put it in perspective, today that's over $1.7 million. The FBI was in a mad dash, gathering all this cash from Seattle banks, and they had to photograph the serial number on every single $20 bill. They ended up with 10,000 individual bills, which weighed around 22 pounds. Think about that. That's a heavy, clumsy bundle to be jumping out of a plane with. And that was just the first of many, many challenges Cooper was about to face. This is it. This is the exact moment it all got real. The flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, she at first just thought he was some lonely businessman trying to give her his phone number. So she just slipped a note into her pocket. But then he leaned in and said, super calmly, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." She looked, and then he just cracked open his briefcase, and inside were 8 red sticks, all wired up to a battery. Witnesses said he was never nasty or cruel. In fact, he ordered a bourbon and soda, paid his tab, and even tried to give the flight attendant a tip. He was the perfect gentleman, who also happened to be a terrorist holding everyone hostage. It's just bizarre.
Okay, so Cooper is gone, and what follows is the biggest and longest manhunt in American history. But the FBI learned something pretty quick and pretty terrifying. It's kind of hard to hunt for a ghost. They were chasing a complete phantom through one of the most rugged, unforgiving landscapes in all of North America. So, what did this ghost actually leave behind for them to work with? Well, almost nothing. He left his black clip-on tie from JCPenney, and believe me, this silly little tie is going to become a huge clue decades down the line. He also left a tie clip, 8 cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes. Oh, and 66 fingerprints, none of which ever matched anyone in any database. And look what he took with him, the original ransom note. He knew exactly what evidence he needed to get rid of. It was like a masterclass in leaving just enough to create a legend, but not nearly enough to get caught.
The sheer scale of this search, which was codenamed Nordjack, it was just immense.
mean, the FBI brought in over 200 Army soldiers. They were sweeping the ground on foot, they had helicopters in the air, they even used a submarine to search the bottom of a lake. They searched for weeks, and then they came back the next spring and did it all over again. And the result was always the exact same. Absolutely nothing. Not a single trace of Cooper, his gear, or his money. It was as if the forest just opened up and swallowed him whole.
And then, silence. For almost 9 years, the case was completely cold. Nothing. Until February 1980, an 8-year-old kid named Brian Ingram is on a camping trip with his family. He's digging a fire pit in the sand on a riverbank called Tennebar, and he uncovers these 3 rotting bundles of cash. The FBI confirmed the serial numbers. It was Cooper's money. Now, you'd think this would solve the mystery, right? Nope. It made it even weirder. The money was found miles away from where they thought he jumped, and geologists said there was no way it just washed ashore over 9 years. It looked like someone had to have put it there. But who? And why?
So this all leads us to the one central question that has haunted this case from the very beginning. After jumping into a freezing storm in the dead of night over a dense, dark wilderness, did D.B. Cooper actually survive? And here's the thing, for every piece of evidence that says no way, there's a pretty good counterargument that says, well, maybe he did.
All right, let's really break this down. The argument that he died is pretty compelling. I mean, he jumped into a storm with 200-mile-per-hour winds at 10,000 feet. The temperature was freezing. He was wearing a business suit and loafers, for crying out loud. No expert skydiver on Earth would even dream of attempting a jump like that. In fact, one of the parachutes he was given was a dummy chute that was sewn shut for training. An expert probably would have spotted that. This is why the FBI, back in 2016, finally closed the active case, basically saying he almost certainly died. But the arguments for survival are just as strong. They never found a body. They never found the main parachute or that briefcase. And here's the kicker. Other than that little bit of money found at Tennebar, not one of the 10,000 marked bills has ever shown up, anywhere. Did he have help on the ground? Did he bury the money and just walk away? The total lack of evidence is, in its own weird way, evidence that he got away clean.
So since Cooper himself was basically a ghost, the FBI had to build a profile and start hunting for the man behind the legend. And this led them down an incredible rabbit hole with hundreds of possible suspects, and every single one has a compelling story and a frustrating lack of solid proof.
Get this. In the first 5 years, they looked at and cleared more than 800 different men. The FBI was looking for someone with some kind of aviation or military knowledge, and probably someone who desperately needed cash. That police sketch, based on what the crew remembered, it became one of the most famous faces in the history of true crime. But who was he, for real? Let's look at 3 of the most fascinating suspects.
First up, we have Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. Now, just 4 months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy, a Mormon Sunday school teacher and a Vietnam vet, pulled off a crime that was almost a carbon copy. He hijacked a plane, demanded a huge ransom, and parachuted out the back. The similarities were just so uncanny. A lot of people were convinced he had to be Cooper, maybe just trying his luck a second time. Okay, but this is where this suspect gets really interesting, because new stuff is still coming out. The FBI officially cleared McCoy way back when. They said his description didn't quite match, and he had a rock-solid alibi. He was at home with his family for Thanksgiving. But in 2020, after his mom died, McCoy's own son came forward with an absolute bombshell. He says his mother confessed to him that she not only knew about his dad's copycat crime, but that she actually helped him plan the original D.B. Cooper hijacking too. He's got credit card statements that he says put his dad near the jump zone, totally shattering that old alibi. He even handed over an old parachute he found and gave the FBI his own DNA. I mean, that is a jaw-dropping claim that puts a long-cleared suspect right back at the top of the list.
All right, our next suspect is Robert Rackstraw. This guy was a decorated Army veteran, highly trained in parachuting and demolitions. He was also a known con artist who got kicked out of the Army for lying about his accomplishments. The FBI took a hard look at him in the late 70s and saw a lot of similarities between his mugshot and the Cooper sketch. But the most wild piece of evidence comes from a series of taunting letters that were sent to newspapers after the hijacking.
So, a team of private investigators, including a former Army codebreaker, claimed they found hidden messages in these letters. Using a pretty simple code, they supposedly uncovered phrases that pointed to Rackstraw's old military units, and then the smoking gun, the sentence, "I am Lieutenant Robert W. Rackstraw." Now, Rackstraw himself, he always played games. When reporters asked him straight up if he was Cooper, he'd say things like, There's no denial whatsoever, my dear. He seemed to love the attention, but was it a real confession or just another game from a lifelong con man?
Now, let's get to our third major suspect, and this is where modern science crashes headfirst into this 50-year-old mystery. This guy wasn't identified because of what he did or what he said. He was identified because of microscopic particles found on the single piece of evidence Cooper left behind, that cheap black clip-on tie.
And this is just so cool. It shows how a cold case can suddenly get red hot. In 2007, a group of citizen scientists got a hold of Cooper's tie and stuck it under an electron microscope. They found over 100,000 tiny particles on it, but a few of them were incredibly rare, a specific alloy of titanium and stainless steel. They managed to trace that material to one single lab at a company called Crucible Steel, which was a contractor for Boeing, right there in Seattle. Then they found out that only 8 engineers worked on that specific project. One of them was a man named Vince Peterson. He fit the description of Cooper and traveled to the area all the time for work. All of a sudden, a case built on hazy memories and theories had a hard, physical, scientific lead pointing to a brand new person.
So, look, whether he died in the fall or escaped to a life on a beach somewhere, the man we call Dan Cooper, he pulled off something else pretty remarkable. He somehow transformed himself from a common criminal into an American folk hero. His story is now a permanent part of our culture, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where the whole legend was born.
I mean, the legacy of D.B. Cooper is literally everywhere in that part of the country. You can go to a brewery named after the flight path he took and order a Skyjacker IPA. You can try to solve the crime yourself in an escape room. Every year, all the real enthusiasts get together for CooperCon to swap theories. And the tiny town of Ariel, Washington, near where they think he jumped, they host D.B. Cooper Days. The mystery has been in tons of books, documentaries, you name it. The man might be a ghost, but his legend is very, very much alive.
But Cooper's biggest impact, his most significant legacy, goes way beyond being a folk hero. This one single crime fundamentally and permanently changed air travel for every single one of us. Before Cooper, you could just walk onto a plane with pretty much anything. After Cooper, the modern age of airport security as we know it was born. The FAA mandated metal detectors and baggage screening for the very first time. Cockpit doors were reinforced, and Boeing had to install a special little device on all its 727s. It's a latch that physically stops the rear staircase from being opened in the middle of a flight. And you know what they officially call it? The Cooper Main. He literally has a piece of aviation technology named after him. And that's where we are today. More than half a century later, this case feels more alive than ever. We're getting these shocking deathbed confessions from family members. We've got cutting-edge science uncovering clues that were totally invisible back in 1971. We are, without a doubt, closer than ever to maybe, just maybe, putting a real name to the man in the sunglasses. But you know, that also brings up a fascinating question. Do we actually want to solve it? Or is the mystery of D.B. Cooper a legend that's just far more powerful than the truth could ever hope to be?